Hello, YouTube. Today I'm going to be talking to you about a book that I just read. Let me get in shot. That's going to be the thumbnail of the video. It's called Living and Dying on the Internet by the world notorious Alex Day. Very good book, interesting book, and a book that I have quite a personal connection with. This video is going to consist of basically a combination of a review of this book and also my personal thoughts and recollections about the author himself, because I have quite a few of those, because I have been following this guy for the last 10 years, and I find him intensely interesting. Following him for the last 10 years, it sounds kind of like I'm stalking him. I've been following him for 10 years, and I've just finally found the proof that I need to condemn him. Actually, he has enough of that already. Alex Day, for those of you who don't know, is pretty much the first big YouTube cancellation. He was one of the first canceled YouTubers in a wave of cancellations that happened in early 2014 that included a lot of his friends. I think a guy named Ed Plant, another guy named Tom Milsom, who now goes by Jem Milsom. And it was sort of like the Me Too of YouTube 4 years before Me Too actually happened. And that's why the front cover of the book has a coffin with a play button on it, and it's called Living and Dying on the Internet, because, you know, he actually kind of did live and die on the internet in a way. This book traces his relationship with technology, his relationship with the internet, and how it started as this really cool new thing that he felt like he was like the only person who was really on the internet. And then toward the end of the book, he talks about how everyone else is on the internet and he's the only person who's not on the internet anymore. So it's a well-written book that really comes full circle. But I suppose in order to talk about him and my personal thoughts about him, I have to go all the way back to the beginning of my relationship with YouTube, because I've been watching YouTube since 2010, which makes it a 12-year relationship right now, which is more than half of my life. Back then, I was really into this line of Lego products called Bionicle, which is an interesting line of products, because it wasn't just toys. It was also this fully blown world building experience created by a guy named Greg Farshty. I won't go into the details, but I guess my first experience on YouTube was watching other creators who were into Bionicle talking about it. But the first YouTuber I really connected with, I discovered in January of 2011, and it was the Nostalgia Critic. And he actually wasn't even a YouTuber at this time. People were just uploading his videos to YouTube as bootlegs at that moment. He had his own website. But that's how I discovered him, was through bootleggers like Leisure Suit, Rant Fiend, and Nostalgia Critic Fan 4. And I'll just say this. It changed my life, because I had never seen just a person with a camera who could be as funny as the funniest comedians I've ever seen, as funny as the funniest comedy shows I've ever seen. And when I saw his Cartoon All-Stars to the Rescue review, I laughed so incredibly hard all the way through it. I have never laughed like that at anything other than perhaps the first time I saw Monty Python and the Holy Grail. So this was a very life-changing experience to me, because it showed me the power that one person with a camera could have over an audience.
So, now that all our favorite cartoon characters are together in one spot, what are they gonna talk about?
Marijuana.
Scoozy?
Soon after that, my brother introduced me to another YouTube creator who took some inspiration from the Nostalgia Critic, named BandGeek8408. And not a lot of people know who this guy is. I think he only has 9,000 to 10,000 subscribers. But I think he made a lot of great videos from around 2008 to 2012. He doesn't really upload much anymore. But I was really into him, and it was he who introduced me to the broader world of YouTube that I was unfamiliar with, the world of vloggers. Because BandGeek8408 was something called a Nerdfighter, and Nerdfighteria was a community of YouTubers and audience members. I say was, even though it still, I guess, technically is supposed to be a thing to this day. To me, I think Nerdfighteria is a community. It's a phenomenon that can't really exist on YouTube anymore because YouTube has lost that innocence that it had that made Nerdfighteria possible. It was started by John and Hank Green, who had a channel called Vlogbrothers. John Green is the popular young adult fiction author, John Green, who wrote The Fault in Our Stars. And what was great about the Vlogbrothers in this early days is that they were very positive, they were very silly. There was this air of excitement, like they were doing this brand new thing, and there was no rules established for it yet. And it was really this idea that they took full potential of this new platform they had discovered, and they tried to push the boundaries of whatever was possible on it. I love their sense of humor. Like John Green used to do things like just randomly putting peanut butter all over his face for no reason.
Why haven't you done peanut butter face in a long time? I disagree with your premise. This guy is really affecting my vision. Oh yeah, that's much better.
There was one time when Hank challenged him to eat 5 sheets of toilet paper while discussing the political situation in Nepal, and he did it.
The thing about the political situation in Nepal is that there are these Maoist rebels who control more than half of the country.
And there was always this air of kind of an intellectual interest and curiosity among them, because Hank was really into science. John was, of course, really into literature. And so they called their audience Nerdfighters because they considered themselves nerds and were proud of that fact. And I guess that really kind of came from the guy who sort of inspired them was named Zay Frank. And I guess he laid the blueprints for what would be a Vlogbrothers video. And I think he called his audience something like sport racers or whatever, and so that gave them the idea of calling their audience Nerdfighters. But Nerdfighteria wasn't limited to just the Vlogbrothers and their audience. It expanded all across the world, and we had this whole community back then of Nerdfighters, of people who were all kind of, they all liked each other, they all supported each other, they were all interested in what each other was doing, and there was this great sort of adventurous attitude, this great sort of like anything is possible. You know, there was a kind of innocence in the air back then, which we don't have today, because YouTube now is just this bloated mass, this desiccated thing that's filled with a bunch of money-grubbing idiots who there is no low that the modern YouTuber will not sink to make a quick buck. It wasn't really like that at the time, and there wasn't really a whole lot of drama back then. These days, a YouTuber gets canceled every 5 minutes, it seems like. A YouTuber getting canceled is about as surprising as a Jew wearing a kippah, but back then, it really wasn't heard of. So this was a community I really resonated with. These were people who I really had a connection with, I felt. And they were interesting. They were fun to watch. It wasn't like people like Zoella and Alfie, who were just incredibly boring. I don't know how anybody watched that kind of like daily vlog style YouTuber. They get on the camera, they smile, they're like, and then that's it. It's like, what is interesting about that? I never got why those people were so popular, but Nerdfighters I liked them because they were weird. They were weird people. They were like weird introverts who had a sense of humor about themselves and wanted to do interesting things. They had a slogan, "Don't forget to be awesome, DFTBA," and you would do this hand signal if you're a Nerdfighter. This is the DFTBA hand signal. It's basically like live long and prosper with a thumb out and two of them. And it extended all over the world, including England. England had a really big, strong contingent of Nerdfighters. Probably the biggest in this community was Charlie Is So Cool Like, Charlie McDonnell. Charlie Is So Cool Like's videos always used to end with Stephen Fry saying, "You've just had the almost imponderable joy of watching Charlie Is So Cool Like, which makes you like cool." And he had a housemate named Alex Day, who was the topic of this video. I was a fan of both of these people. The way I discovered Alex Day was kind of interesting because back then in YouTube, they used to, when you go on your homepage, they wouldn't just show you the videos that the people you're subscribed to had uploaded. They also showed you the videos that they dropped a like on. That was just kind of around the time when they switched over from the 5-star rating system to the like-dislike rating system. And they would also show the videos that they commented on. And they would also show the channels that they subscribed to. And I remember Charlie Is So Cool Like used to subscribe to like 50 different channels in a day. It was insane. Like, you would log on to the front page of YouTube and it was, Charlie Is So Cool Like, subscribe to this guy, this guy, this guy, this guy. It's like, how do you find time to watch all these people, Charlie? And so one day, I'm on the front page of YouTube and I see BandGeek8408 has liked a new video, and the video is titled, "What the fuck is 50 Shades of Grey?" which is an eye-catching title. At that time, basically the only thing I knew about 50 Shades of Grey is that it's porn. And so I was like, this should be interesting. This would be funny. So I clicked on it, and this is what I saw.
Oh yeah, hello. Hello, YouTube. The sun is out. It's nice to have a day of sunshine in this fucking country. You know how sometimes you get songs in your head and then sometimes you don't have songs in your head, you just have lines from films or something in your head. Right now I just have Harvey saying, "Mitosis is..." Want to talk to you about a book, internet?
I'm sold. How to explain the appeal of Alex Day? Alex Day was my favorite YouTuber back then. I don't think there's even a question about it. Alex Day was the greatest YouTuber of all time for me. And what I liked about him was he was very funny, very witty, had a great personality. He laughed a lot. His laugh was always so infectious. And he was the king of anecdotes. He had a way of telling stories about his own life and things, observations that he noticed, things that happened to him that made them so entertaining. He had a video called "The Woman at the Reception," describing some awkward moment with him, with a woman at the reception of a swimming pool. And I liked this video so much that I showed it to my brother, and he said it was like an episode of Seinfeld.
I dried my hair with his towel. That's true. That's what happened. It was just a naked stranger's towel that I used to dry myself without him knowing, because again, walking past the woman at reception, oh, his hair's wet, that's weird. I couldn't face that idea. So I had to make a judgment call. That was my morning. I hope you had a good morning. Oh.
He had another video called "Gimme Some Sugar," where he talks about he was in America and he wasn't used to this idea, because I guess in the UK it's more common to call random women you don't know sweetheart, and so he didn't know that wasn't really a thing in America, that was weird in America. And so he's at a restaurant and he orders tea and there's no sugar in the tea. So he sees the waitress coming by and he says, "Excuse me, sweetheart, can you give me some sugar?" Hilarious stuff. I loved his anecdotes. He had another funny video called "Stamina," where he talks about he was having sex one night, and he lives with his mom, and so the next morning he comes downstairs, and his mom says, "Did you have a good evening?" And he goes, yeah, it was good. And she says, "You enjoy yourself?" Yeah, did. "You want to keep it down a bit next time?" "Oh." "My mom heard me fuck. I'm not going to do that so loud anymore." So he says, yeah, okay, sure. That's all she needed to say. She adds one more comment. "You had impressive stamina, though." Me recounting these anecdotes doesn't at all do him justice. They're so much funnier when he says them. Alex Day was also a musician, and he was very keen on having a career in music. He made a song called "Forever Yours" that reached number 4 in the charts he was trying to get the Christmas number 1, which is a really big deal in the UK. He only got to number 4. So it didn't really do much for his career. But that really just speaks to that spirit of early YouTube at this time, which was, it wasn't all that heard of for a YouTuber to use his fame that he had acquired on YouTube to propel himself in bigger and bigger ways in the wider world of entertainment. And so it was a very new phenomenon, and it was very exciting back then. And so there was this real air of limitlessness, and you can do anything. He had a band called Chameleon Circuit with Charlie Sokulike and a couple other canceled YouTubers now. And they made songs based on Doctor Who. And they somehow, for one of their videos, managed to get the actual TARDIS from Doctor Who, the actual set of the TARDIS in one of their music videos. That is just the level of excitement there was. Anything is possible. Another great moment I remember is there was one time when Charlie Is So Cool Like made a video called "I'm Scared."
In regards to my YouTube channel, not only am I not posting content as regularly as I want to and know that I can, because I've done it well enough in the past, but I also don't think the stuff I've been making recently is just as good as it used to be. And that just makes me really sad. And the worst part of it for me is that I am trying incredibly hard to be the person that I want to be again. But every time I sit and stare at that blank text file ready to try and come up with something new, I find myself terrified to create, like genuinely scared. And the thing that I'm scared of, honestly, I think it's you.
And the rest of Nerdfighter Era came out in support of him. Hank Green made a video. Michael Aranda made a video. Several people made these videos saying, kind of validating his feelings and saying, yes, we relate to you. We're all scared. We all worry about what people think of us. We all worry about how good our videos are, or about making enough videos, or whatever the thing is. And then Alex Day puts out a video, and I couldn't find it on the internet anymore because a lot of Alex's videos have been scrubbed from the internet. But it was very funny because he started the video with this montage of a bunch of YouTubers saying, "I'm scared," in this black and white filter. And then there's a shot of his sofa, and his head just pops up from behind the sofa like, "Is it all right to come out? Everyone's been scared lately, so I don't know, I'm just being cautious." It's a great moment of irreverence from him, and that's really the thing. I think the value that he really brought to the community was his sense of irreverence, of not taking things too seriously, and recognizing that the great thing about YouTube was just having fun and being silly and not worrying so much. He had a thing he liked to say, "I'm happy with my handy cam," and that was about other YouTubers at this time, like Charlie, were buying these big expensive setups with expensive cameras, lighting, expensive microphones, and it would take them like 10 minutes to set up a video before making it. Whereas Alex just had his video camera, and he would You know, he would sit in front of a window to get light, and that's all he needed. He didn't need a microphone. He didn't need lights. And he pretty much maintained himself that way for up until this day. Alex, even when he made his music videos, I don't think he owned a camera that good. I think he borrowed equipment from other people because he was very keen on this idea that YouTube is a do-it-yourself thing. You know, YouTube had the old slogan, broadcast yourself. I think they should still have that slogan because I think that's what's so great about YouTube. That's what made me fall in love with YouTube in the first place, was this idea that anybody could do it. And it's a message that's especially resonant to me today because all of that overly professionalizing of YouTube has, I think, gone out of control to the point where now YouTube, I think people care way more about how their videos look than how good they actually are. But the thing about Alex is sometimes he would take breaks from making videos and he wouldn't put out anything for a while. In 2013, he took like a 5-month break or something like that. It was such a long time since the last time he uploaded. And when he finally came back, he was in this new apartment. He had changed his wardrobe. The thing about Alex is he was a minimalist, so he only had 6 articles of clothing at any time. And if he bought something, he would throw something out. And so every time he changed his wardrobe, he would say that he regenerated, like in Doctor Who, and the Doctor regenerates into the next Doctor. And so he had regenerated, new apartment, new scene. He made a video called Hello, I'm Alex Day, basically kind of reintroducing himself to YouTube. And it really felt like a renaissance for Alex Day. It felt like a bright, shining new era. I was very excited for it. This was like late 2013, early 2014. Another thing about Alex is that everyone knew, and I mean everyone knew, I knew, the whole world knew, that he was dating this other YouTuber who I also watched named Carrie Fletcher, who had a channel called It's Way Past My Bedtime. And yet, they were always so coy about it. They never wanted to reveal this open secret. And I remember there was some video that Carrie made where there was a picture behind her of 2 people kissing, and one of the people in the comments said, "Is that you and Alex in that picture?" And she said, "Definitely not." So I always had the impression, because of that Carrie was the person who was hiding the relationship. But the revelation was that it was actually Alex. And he writes about why he did that in his book. Basically, he had a more public relationship with another YouTuber earlier on, and that went bad, and it caused a lot of drama, and they sang songs about each other, and he just didn't want to repeat that same thing again. And so, and besides, the relationship with Carrie was never all that great to begin with. I mean, they liked each other a lot, but they also just weren't very compatible, and he knew that it just wasn't going to work out. And so he didn't want to publicize that. But Carrie was totally willing to publicize it. She was totally fine with the whole world knowing they were dating. And so he makes this video during his revival where he talks about getting back together with Carrie and everything that he did. What he says is that he had treated his girlfriend like an accessory in his life up until that point. Like, he has his own path in life, and she's just an add-on, and he realized that that was a mistake and that he should be more accommodating. And so he tried everything that he could to get her back. They had kind of broken up in a way, and he did some big thing with, some lavish presentation, and he basically won her back into his life, and he was excited about that. And that was when he decided to finally, all right, you know what? I'm ready to reveal to the world this thing that everyone already knew. And then one day, he just disappears. He just stops making videos. And I didn't really think anything of it because, like I said, he'd had a 5-month hiatus before. So I thought, well, maybe he's just gone for a while. I'll be patient. So I don't know how long I waited, but Alex is gone for a bit, and during this time, Charlie Is So Cool uploads a video called Sex and Consent.
When you're in the mood and your partner isn't, yes, it can be very frustrating. But in my experience, there is nothing better than being with someone who you know definitely wants to be there with you.
Now, at the time, I didn't really think anything of it. I think Charlie had done a sex education video before, so this to me just seemed like part of that thing. He was just making another one. But then, to my surprise, a little bit later, like a day or two later, Hank Green makes a video on Vlogbrothers called Sexual Abuse, Consent, and Culture.
I think that our culture has kind of a messed up relationship with sex. We somehow have made these relationships into like predator-prey relationships. Like one person is the cruise missile of desire, and the other one is the sweet, chaste little kitten. And the cruise missile has to get the kitten, and the kitten runs away. I don't know why it's a cruise missile and a kitten. I do know, though, that this is a dumb system.
Okay, what's going on here? Am I in trouble? Did I do something to offend you? What's with all the... Is there something I don't know about going on? Felt like there was this open secret that everyone was privy to that I had no knowledge of. And I must have read the comments on those videos at the time, but they didn't provide me with any insights, so it seems like people just were hush-hush. They weren't even really talking about this. Whatever this thing is, and I don't know, for some reason, these two popular Nerdfighter YouTubers make a video about the exact same topic within the space of a few days. So I don't know what prompted that. At first, I maybe just thought that Hank watched Charlie's video and was inspired by it, but not too weird. So I just kind of, I moved on, moved on with life. Didn't think about it. And then eventually I just started to really miss Alex. Like, man, where is Alex? He's been gone for so long. And so I go to his channel, and I go to his most recent upload, which was, I think, a video of him playing Sopio with his cousin Danny. Sopio is a card game that the two of them developed. And my goal was to go into the comments and read what people had to say about Alex's absence, hoping that people would be like, Alex, where are you? We miss you. That kind of thing that you always see. I just kind of wanted to commiserate a bit, but that's not what I saw. Instead, I saw that dreaded word, allegations. No, not Allegasia, the fantasy land of Christopher Paolini's inheritance cycle. No, allegations. So I did a little bit of research, and I found this very valuable document that someone had put on a website called Tumblr.
Tumbling down Tumblr, there's so much to see.
I just installed Missing E.
I had heard of Tumblr before. I have never been on Tumblr since. It's still a pretty mysterious website for me. I was never really sure what Tumblr was. But there was a document that was on Tumblr called a Masterpost. And it had 13 different allegations against Alex Day made by several different women.
This is a very interesting situation.
And I read every single one of them. The main revelation that kind of disturbed me was the fact that Alex was just so blatantly cheating on Carrie this whole time. He had I don't know how many different girlfriends or sexual partners or whatever during this time when he was supposedly in a monogamous relationship with Carrie Fletcher. And then I started thinking, I'm wondering why he chose to keep his relationship a secret for this long. Suspicious. And so that was a little bit upsetting to me, just because I liked Carrie so much. And Carrie's such an innocent soul, Carrie's just a very wholesome person, so it was kind of like, oh, come on, Alex, what are you doing? But these allegations weren't just about him cheating on his girlfriend, because that's whatever. They were a little bit more harsh in character. Now, I want to make this clear. because there's a lot of idiots on the internet who don't understand this, but there were no actual direct allegations of any kind of rape or sexual assault on the part of Alex Day. That was never a thing. People who say it's a thing are idiots who are uninformed, who are just, you know, they hear something in the corner of their ear and then they're like, oh, that, and it gets kind of scrambled up in their brain and it comes out the other side of the telephone wrong. That's not what these allegations were saying. What they were saying was that there were certain abusive and manipulative behaviors by this certain Alex Day figure that were very problematic for this community. There are only 3 of these allegations in my mind that stand out that I remember reading from back in the day, and I'll go into more of it. I'll go into more detail when I get to talking about the book itself, because Alex actually does a much better job than I ever could at summarizing the events of that day. And I'm actually probably going to just read most of, or if not all, of the chapter that he wrote in this book about the allegations because it's so fascinating. But the ones that I remember reading, there was one where a woman was talking about how she was hanging out with him. He tried to kiss her and she said no. He backed off. And then later that night, he tries to kiss her again. She says no. And she describes feeling like he was pressuring her to get intimate with him, and that he was mad at her for refusing, and that he made her feel bad for not wanting to give in. Which, you know, reading that's okay, that's clearly problematic. That's kind of upsetting. There was another one that I read. This is probably the one that freaked me out the most. It was him and his cousin Danny, who I was pretty familiar with, and I don't remember all the details, but there's something about 2 girls who were 17, which is the age of consent in the United Kingdom, I think. They were hanging out with Alex and Danny and sleeping over with them, and there was somehow a situation where there were only 2 beds and there were 4 of them, so I guess they slept in the beds with the girls, and then the girl who's writing this allegation talks about how, like, she wasn't prepared for this, and then suddenly she found him on top of her that night, which that's kind of like all she said about it. It's kind of vague the way she talks about it, and it leaves a lot to your imagination, and your imagination can kind of fill in a lot of the details, which isn't exactly a good thing with an allegation of this nature, but when you read it, it comes across as kind of disturbing, just the way it's written and all that. And then there's this other allegation that I remember, and this was the one that kind of, this one upset me for different reasons, because it was titled this very salacious title, Alex Day is a sexual predator who targets minors, or something like that, which is like, whoa, 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 whoa. I gotta read this one. And in it, but what annoyed me about it was in it, like, the title is not at all justified by the text of the allegation, because the text of the allegation is, she was 15, she was at some sort of a YouTube convention with Alex, and there were a bunch of other people, and Alex said, hey, why don't we go into this room and record a video? I think they were playing Sopio, and it was like a private, she describes it as, he took me into a private room. When everyone else was in the main room making their videos, he pulled me aside, took me into a private room. And then she says that he tried to get inappropriate with her. And she doesn't say any details. That's basically all she says, inappropriate. And that she stopped it before it could get too far. And then that was it. The problem I had with this is that with such a salacious title, not implying, outright stating something incredibly bad about Alex, there really wasn't enough meat and potatoes in this allegation to justify it. I don't know, if she had provided any kind of detail that showed what actually happened, maybe I wouldn't have been so unsympathetic to her. But I just found this very, it raised my bullshit alarm. And it made this whole thing seem like what was happening was one person came out with their experience of feeling manipulated by Alex Day, and then a bunch of people chimed in with theirs because they read that one, and then they went back and thought about their experience with him and recontextualized it in their minds and maybe thought about it in a different way and then came out with a negative conclusion about Alex. That is what I was thinking back then when I was reading these allegations. But, you know, I didn't want to judge too harshly because I didn't know the details. I didn't know what these women were going through. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to be open-minded about this. I loved Alex, so I wanted him to be... I didn't want these things to be true about him, but I wasn't letting that color my perception too much, and I was like, okay, let's hear everyone out. But I'm sad to say that I was like the only person with that opinion. Pretty much everyone else was completely anti-Alex Day immediately from the get-go. And there was nobody talking about that one allegation that I talked about with the underage girl. Nobody was talking about that in a way, the way I was thinking about it, which is, you know, this seems kind of manipulative. She's using a lot of manipulative language here, trying to get you to think something based on nothing. Nobody was criticizing that. Nobody was even just adding any kind of nuance. And not even nuance. Nobody wanted to know Alex's side of the story at all. It seemed like I was the only one who was like, okay, all of these allegations put together are kind of damning. Let's see what he has to say about it. Let's hear him justify it. Let's hear him talk about it. Hear him out, basically. Now, Alex did make a Facebook post in response to this, but it wasn't very useful. It didn't really have any details, and it kind of made it sound like he was just admitting to everything he did and was apologizing for it. And honestly, he was so apologetic that I thought, well, we gotta listen to him, at least because he's doing his best to make amends for this. So we gotta at least hear him out. You know, if he had come out and been like, oh, I don't care, you know, I don't care about all these allegations, they don't affect me. If you don't like me, then who cares? If he had been all kind of flippant about it, then maybe I could understand why people were just so incredibly anti-Alex Day, just immediately turned on a dime. But no, that's not what happened. He was actually very apologetic. He was like, man, I really didn't mean to hurt anyone. I'm really sorry. I didn't realize I was hurt. I didn't realize I was hurting anyone. And so I was just like, okay, this post, what I didn't like about Alex's Facebook response was that it just didn't really have any meat and potatoes on it, like I talked about earlier. It just didn't have any details. And I can understand why he maybe didn't want to go into the details and he didn't want to just debunk things. But it was important to me to hear his side of the story. And that's the thing about this book, is that for so many years, for like 8 years, I was like, what is his side of the story? And I just never got it. And it was frustrating me for 8 years. And then I read this book finally, and I finally understand his side of the story now. I finally get to hear him out. But nobody else wanted to. And not only that, they just wanted to completely excise him from the Nerdfighter community, from the YouTube community in general. There were people talking about how they wanted his channel to get terminated. It's like they wanted to ruin his life, and they didn't want him on the platform because they had this idea that, well, if we just let him stay, then he'll just keep doing this over and over again. But there wasn't really any evidence for that. And all the evidence pointed to the fact that Alex was apologetic and wanting to change and opening up a dialogue with the community and wanting to get through this. That's where the evidence was pointing to. And so it was really an unfounded assumption that Alex would just keep doing this over and over again. There was this idea that if someone makes a mistake or a bunch of mistakes, shows a pattern of making mistakes, and they show a willingness to change, you can't trust that willingness to change. That it's always fake and manipulative because they are just forever a fake and manipulative person, and you can't trust anything they'll ever do, so you have to completely excise them. And, well, what's troubling about this is that it was not only the fan community, the viewers, it was also just his friends, people who knew him, because, you know, being a big YouTuber, a lot of his friends were also YouTubers, public figures, and a lot of them just completely broke ties with him, like Charlie is so cool, like Hank deleted him and his merchandise from his store, dftba.com. And there was a kind of blacklist going on where if you were associated with Alex Day and if you showed any interest in keeping in touch with him or maintaining a kind of acquaintance with him, then you were immediately canceled. And so that basically pressured everyone out of fear. Even people who didn't want to cut ties with Alex Day, they had to cut ties with Alex Day, otherwise everyone would hate them. And I suppose the reason I didn't fall victim to all this like other people did was that a little while earlier, I had started watching The Amazing Atheist. I started watching him in late 2013.
Introduce your toddler to the excitement of reading the Bible in a way that he or she can really enjoy. Yeah, because when I think of the Bible, I think excitement! 807 years and begat sons and daughters, and all the days of Seth were 912 years and he died. And Enos lived 90 years and begat Cainan, and Enos lived after he begat Cainan. Yeah! Bible! Woo! Bible! Read me the Bible! I love the Bible! Oh my God, yeah!
And I started watching the whole atheist community on YouTube that eventually became the anti-SJW community, which had kind of there's problems with how that community evolved, and it pretty much just became the gateway for the right wing to take over YouTube. But back then it was a bunch of liberals and atheists who were just tired of all of the nonsense. They were tired of religion. They were tired of people telling you what to think all the time. And they promoted this attitude of free thought and relying on facts and evidence for your conclusions, and not listening to what other people have to say just because they tell you to believe them. And so really, it was very important for me at this time, when I was around 14 years old, I was getting really into this free thought stuff, and I wanted free thought. And so I suppose that's why I didn't get all wrapped up in the hype, because I was thinking, okay, this is one story, this is one narrative that's going on, but I can't, in good faith, I can't honestly just support this without having all the information. But nobody else cared about having all the information. To them, it was just, you have to believe victims. And the problem with that is that you don't know if someone is a victim until you know they're a victim. So this idea that you need to believe victims is circular. It's illogical. There's no actual logical basis for it. If you talk about wanting the details before you come to a conclusion, then you are not supposedly not believing victims, or then they'll lob other accusations at you. I remember anytime I tried to have a conversation of, maybe this is a bit of an overreaction. Maybe we need to measure our response. Maybe Alex Day isn't quite as bad as other people are saying. The response generally was, what you saying? Alex Day is a fucking nonce. Don't talk about nonce like that. Oh, you must be a nonce yourself, you fucking twat. It was just this very judgmental, like, oh, I immediately know everything because I'm just so special that I know the truth. And anyone who questions anything must have evil intentions. And it's like, this is the kind of cult-like religious behavior that I hated in the first place. And that was driving me towards all these free thought vloggers. And so, but the problem was I was seeing this just running rampant in Nerdfighteria. And it really started to change my point of view on who and what Nerdfighteria is. You know, John Green had this slogan, imagine people complexly, because he had written a book called Paper Towns. And the moral of the story is at the end, the main character learns to imagine people complexly. And I liked this idea. Of course, it's a great idea. Everyone should like it because it rings true. And yet, I could see that the Nerdfighter community was not living up to that. John and Hank were not living up to that standard. Nobody was upholding this idea of imagining people complexly. Don't forget to be awesome. And everyone was just like, no, imagining people complexly is only for victims, but abusers, we can just imagine them very simply, because the mind of an abuser is very simple, and we don't actually need to go into a lot of detail and analysis of it, because if we do that, that's dangerous, because it means that victims will be afraid to come forward because they'll be scrutinized. Their words will be scrutinized. How can we afford that? I'm sorry, but like, yeah, you gotta be scrutinized. Everyone's gotta be scrutinized. When you're coming forward with something like this, yeah, I'm sorry, like, that's just part of the process. But it's like, if you try to explain that to these people, you can't get it through their thick heads. And it's like, the eventual result of this is I became completely alienated from Nerdfighteria. And I didn't even realize that until I started working on this video and doing my reading of this book. I didn't even realize that what eventually turned me away from Nerdfighteria, what eventually made me bored of Nerdfighteria, was the cancellation of Alex Day and the response to it. Because this whole time I thought this community was, you know, don't forget to be awesome, and imagine people complexly, and, you know, science is cool. And it was all this like intellectual, just encouraging people to learn. But, you know, it's sort of like school. They encourage you to learn, but they don't encourage you to think. And once you try to actually think about something remotely controversial, you get shut down. And it's kind of like another video that I didn't particularly like from Hank Green was called Do You Believe in God? And in it, he spends the whole video kind of acting like he's gonna say whether he believes in God or not. And then he just blue balls us at the end. He never tells us. And he spends this whole video just talking about, I don't know why people care so much if you believe in God. Well, maybe because it's such a huge, important issue. Maybe it's because, like, the very nature of the cosmos and our understanding of reality itself and science kind of hinges on this idea of whether you believe in fantasy or fact. You know what I'm saying? And so it's like, and I know that Hank Green is most likely an atheist, just from the way he talks. John Green is a Christian, but I'm pretty sure Hank is an atheist. I wish he just would have been able to say it. Like, if he honestly didn't care so much about whether people believe in God or not, he should just be able to comfortably say, hey guys, I'm an atheist, and that's it. Or maybe I'm totally wrong. Maybe he's a Christian. He gives me the atheist vibe. But it's just like this fear. There's so much fear about what people think of you, what people think of your ideas. And like I said in my video about discourse called Debates Are a Stupid Waste of Time, your opinions don't matter. And this is just something that's so important that most people don't realize. You don't need to have the right opinion about stuff. And if you have an opinion, you don't need to care about that opinion. It's just a thing. It's just an idea. It's just a maybe. And don't take it too seriously. But everyone is just so stuck in this mindset of, I have to please people. My audience has to like me. They have to agree with me. And the problem with this is it cultivates a mentality among an audience like that. Like, my audience isn't going to be like that. When I eventually get an audience, it's not going to be an audience of Nerdfighters. It's not going to be an audience of intolerant idiots who are unwilling to even have a conversation about something. It's going to be an audience of people more or less like me, thinking the way I think. And the problem with Nerdfighter Era, the problem with this whole community was that it was cultivated the wrong way. And it cultivated this mentality of, everything has to be perfect. And if you slip up, then you're a pariah all of a sudden. If you show a pattern of abuse. And so, yeah, that pretty much just drove me away from Nerdfighters, drove me away from the wholesome, positive aspect of YouTube, and drove me further into the negative, cynical, mean side of YouTube, where people just didn't care about what each other thinked, and they said what their opinion is, and I think that was a needed thing for me, and it was a needed thing for YouTube, and I'm glad it happened, but the result of it is that YouTube kind of lost its spark that made it so fun in the beginning. And so, anyway, Alex Day spends a few months away from YouTube. I really missed him. Most other people were just mad at him. He comes back later that year, and he makes a video called The Past, where he's all apologetic, and he's like, I just want to have a conversation about this, and I hope everyone's okay. And everyone's like, you're evil. Bah! He's such a mild-mannered dude, too. It's like, they were so mad at this guy who was just like, I'm sorry, man. I didn't know that I was such a bad person, but I'm trying to be better. And they're just like, no, you're not trying to be better. Don't tell us about you. We know more about you than you. Just so much ire and anger. And that was really the thing. It's like, don't forget to be awesome. It was so positive. And then suddenly it's like, no, turns out, mask off, this community is just full of a bunch of hateful, just ugly people. It's like, why do I even want to be a part of that community anymore? What did I ever see in these people? And so I continued, and I was about like one of 30,000 other people. The number slowly dwindled. Alex Day got to 1 million subscribers right when he was canceled. He was he wasn't one of the first people to get 1 million subscribers, not by any means, but 1 million wasn't all that common back then. These days, there are like hundreds of people with 1 million subscribers who I've never even heard of. But back then, it wasn't all that common, so it was kind of a big deal when he got 1 million. His number dwindled to 800-something thousand very quickly. And only about 30,000 of those continued watching his videos after he came back, and that number slowly dwindled down. These days, only a couple hundred people regularly watch his videos, and I'm among them. When he came back, it was interesting because he had been to Village de Prunier, which is Plum Village in English, a place in France, a monastery where Thich Nhat Hanh lived. And it's funny, for this video, I looked up how to pronounce Thich Nhat Hanh, and I came up with like 3 different completely contradictory results. So I don't know how to pronounce Thich Nhat Hanh, so I'm just going to pronounce it the way it is, the way it looks in English. But anyway, he went there for a while and he came back to YouTube. And he was basically like a Buddhist kind of mindfulness YouTuber for a while. He was encouraging positivity and peace of mind, meditation. And I liked that because not only was it a very sensible direction for someone who had been canceled like that, and for someone who maybe perhaps realized just now how much he had hurt certain people who he didn't realize he had hurt. But it also was, it was something that I was already interested in at the time, because when I was around 14, I was really into Buddhism. I was really into Oriental philosophy. I was watching a lot of Alan Watts at that time. So I was already into this stuff, and so it was really cool to see this guy who I'd been following and who was really my favorite YouTuber. He was right on the same page with me, making the kind of stuff that I already was into. I kept watching his videos for the time that he was making them on his main channel, and then he goes to Mount Fuji in Japan, because I think there was a Plum Village event going on there. And he makes this video saying, my channel is done. I'm done making videos on this channel. It's complete. And instead, I will be making videos on a thing called The Daily Day, which is another channel he set up, sort of like he's just rebranding himself and starting fresh, which I thought was a pretty good direction for him, making these kind of mindfulness, Buddhist-ish videos. But then the funny thing is, so I unsubscribed to Alex Day because I figured, well, he said he's not going to be uploading here anymore, so why do I need to be subscribed to here? And I subscribed to The Daily Day. I watched his videos for a while, and they were great. And then he stopped making them, and he announced that he's turning over ownership of The Daily Day to someone else, and he's going to still be contributing videos to it, but he's opening up the channel to the wider community to all contribute videos about mindfulness. And of course, this was a bad idea because nobody actually subscribed to Alex because they liked mindfulness. Even though I liked mindfulness, I didn't subscribe to him for that reason. They subscribed because of his personality. And so very few people actually wanted to contribute any videos, and they just weren't very popular, and so the channel died. It was pretty much like an instant death for the channel, and I was like, man, okay, well, that's that. I don't know what's going to happen to Alex from this point on, and so I forgot about him, or maybe I didn't forget about him, but for about, I don't know, how long was it, like a year? For about a year, I didn't see anything from him. And then one day, I'm like, I'm going to go back and watch some old Alex Day videos. And I go to his channel, his old channel, and he's made like 10 new ones. And I'm like, what? You told me I didn't need to be subscribed to this channel anymore, and now you're suddenly back and you have 10 videos that I missed out on. But anyway, I watched those and they were great. Honestly, today, I think he's making better videos than he's ever made. I think he's never lost his step. And right now he's not even making public videos anymore. There's basically nothing on his channel at this point. He's gotten rid of everything. And the reason is that he got a job, or he was trying to get a job for a while, and trying to make it clear to employers that he wasn't interested in being a public figure anymore, so that they would take him seriously, so that they would know that he's very committed to this new direction that he's going in. And so now he only makes videos on Patreon, and I highly recommend, if you haven't been keeping up with Alex, I highly recommend going to his Patreon and checking out his new videos, because they are excellent. And I suppose that brings me at this point to this book. Now, he had written his book, The Underground Storyteller, right around the time he was canceled, and he had a book deal with Random House for that book. But then they dropped him because he stopped being a YouTuber for a while, and the only reason Random House was interested in working with him was because he was a YouTuber and they wanted to work with a YouTuber. So he was the first YouTuber with a book deal, and the book deal never went through. But he put out the book anyway, and I remember checking it out because it was free on Kindle. I downloaded it, and I wasn't really interested in it. It wasn't really resonating with me. I didn't really like it, so I just put it down, never really picked it up again. And then a few years later, he announces that he's writing another book, this time a memoir or an autobiography. I suppose I'd always intended to check it out at some point, but I wasn't really excited for it because, like I said, I didn't really like his other book, and so I thought, So I didn't read it for the first 4 years. I think it came out in 2018. Didn't check it out. But then recently, I saw a documentary about Sir James Savile. And that's a very interesting story, but it, for obvious reasons, it got me interested in Alex Day again, and I decided to check out his Patreon, because I hadn't, for some reason, I hadn't been subscribed to his Patreon for a while. Maybe it was because he upped the donation bracket to like $7 something, and I couldn't afford it back then, but I can afford it now. So I checked out his Patreon, watched all his videos, was really interested, and so I decided to finally read the book, which I was very surprised by how entertained I was by it. It was a thoroughly pleasant read the whole way through. I loved hearing his perspective on his life, perspective on the internet. He does a great job at talking about the internet for someone. You know, you don't have to really know or understand the internet to understand the book. He does a good job of explaining things and explaining how the internet shaped and changed his life and those around him, and the kind of the effects of that. An interesting thing about this book is I didn't know that his whole music career was he was the protege of this dude named Jonathan King. And Jonathan King was basically a failed pop star from the 1960s. He was a pop singer who never really had a hit, but he owns the rights to a lot of popular songs, and he makes a lot of money off of the royalties from that stuff. And so he's this eccentric British failed musician. And the other thing about him is that he was accused of these sexual crimes a while back that he actually was tried and convicted of and spent time in prison for. And, well, it's Alex's opinion and the opinion of a lot of people, actually, that he never actually committed them, that he was framed. And I'm just realizing that... See, I didn't want to talk very much about Jonathan King in this video because I don't find him particularly interesting or relevant to the subject. However, I know that if I don't talk about the issue of whether Jonathan King was guilty or innocent of the crimes that he committed and was charged and convicted of and then exonerated for, then people will complain. So I guess I am obligated to make a small statement about it. I personally happen to think that Jonathan King is most likely guilty of these offenses. However, I have not done any research on the subject. I've just read a couple of articles about it, and one of them in which he was defending Jimmy Savile, which looks really bad on him. But you know, there you go. That's my opinion. I haven't done any research, but I think he's guilty. It's funny because you kind of get the sense when reading it that maybe Jonathan King he saw a bit of himself in Alex and was thinking, well, maybe if I didn't make it big, then I can make it big. I can have a second chance with this dude. Didn't work, of course, and it's funny because he was complaining to Alex that none of his songs were hits. And Alex said, well, how do you write a hit song? And he said, dude, if I knew how to write a hit song, you think I'd be here talking to you? There's another funny story about Jonathan King in this book where he's like, I've got a song for you. I've got a song, Alex. And it goes, you're stupid, stupid, da-na-na-na-na-na, you're stupid, stupid, da-na-na-na-na-na, you're stupid, stupid, da-na-na-na-na-na-na-na-na, and I love you.
Stupid, stupid, and you love me.
And that was really funny to read because, like, I didn't know that Jonathan King wrote the hook to Stupid Stupid. I thought that was an Alex Day original, but turns out, no, the idea came from Jonathan King. And Alex in this book, of course, he talks all about how he cheated on not just Carrie. He was basically, it's funny, he made a video back in the day called The Ladies' Man of YouTube, where he made fun of the fact that somebody in an article had called him the ladies' man of YouTube. But it's funny looking back at that now because it turns out he actually was the ladies' man of YouTube because he was very sexually prolific at this time, and it's like he always had a girlfriend, but he was always cheating on his girlfriend, just constantly. And he talks about how part of the reason why he kept doing this was that the first time he had a girlfriend, and then there was another girl who he had feelings for. He didn't do anything with her, but he had feelings for her. He told his girlfriend about this, just trying to be honest about it, and then it made her really upset. And then his mom comes to him like, "Why'd you do that? Why'd you make her upset?" And, you know, his mom talked about how when she was cheated on a long time ago, she wished that she had never been told about it because it made her so upset that it would have been better if she just didn't know. And so basically Alex took in this information, took it to heart, and was like, okay, if I am going to cheat on my girlfriend, I'm just not going to tell her. And it's better that she just doesn't know. And so it just started this cycle of just him continuing to do it over and over, even though he knew it was wrong, and he kind of found ways to justify it in his head. Like, he explains it. I'll read a bit of the book where he talks about it. "I used to have sex with people for a lot of silly reasons that undervalued us both. I once had a challenge with a few girls I knew to see who would be the first to sleep with the entire zodiac, i.e. 12 people with different star signs. I undertook a crusade to sleep with someone from every Hogwarts house, a goal defined by one of my friends as winning the house cup. Thus, when a Swedish YouTuber flew over who, in her own words, got into vlogging because boys were hot and she wanted to bang them, it didn't take much beyond 'she's Swedish, that's new' for me to color myself interested. She was over for a week and slept with at least 3 YouTubers on what one friend called her UK fuck tour. Her schedule was so full, she stopped at my place on her way back to Sweden, spending an hour at mine before her flight like I was a layover, which I suppose I was. 'You slept with her?' said Crystal later. I nodded. 'Nice,' she said, high-fiving me. She is hot. Crystal, by the way, is the first of the women who published allegations against Alex, and according to Alex, he thinks that she published 2 against him. I perceived these further acts of cheating as collateral incidents because I was already keeping the truth of my failures from Marilyn. Marilyn, by the way, something about this book is that he doesn't refer to anybody by their full name or their last name, and I don't really know why. It might just be he's worried about litigious people coming after him. But with Carrie, he goes so far as to not even call her Carrie. He calls her Marilyn. So whenever he says Marilyn in this book, he's talking about Carrie. Because I was already keeping the truth of my failures from Marilyn, and because I incorrectly believed her finding out, rather than the acts themselves, was where the harm lay. I didn't see what difference it made whether I hid one act of unfaithfulness or several. Either I was good or I wasn't. And I wasn't. It goes without saying that this is pretty dumb, because the relationship you had is over the moment you cheat on someone. Maybe you try to compensate by being even more attentive and loving, or maybe you become anxious and paranoid about them knowing the truth, or maybe your desire to get away with it leaves you controlling and possessive, or maybe you check out and become distant and moody, but there will be a shift in your dynamic, and don't think the other party won't notice. We aren't the Jedi we think we are. A tear will appear, and all you do by ignoring it is make it wider. The sooner you stitch it up, the better for everyone. It's only now I can see the real person I was trying to spare the truth from was myself. I didn't want to admit how much I was hurting someone I cared about, so I pushed it out and tried not to think about it. By not thinking about it, I didn't think about the consequences of it, which meant I kept doing it. But the more you push it out, the harder it'll push back. Although hundreds of thousands of people thought they knew me, I didn't know myself. And if I didn't know what I wanted, I had no chance of communicating it to others. Perhaps I was a sex addict. No, I was a love addict. Yes, I craved emotional intimacy with everyone I met. No, I was incapable of commitment, right? It just wasn't for me. No, wait, it wasn't for anyone at all. Yes, that's it. Monogamy was unnatural at a biological level, and oh, I was enlightened for being in touch with my primal instincts. I told myself all along that I was acting out of compassion and courtesy, pleasing Marilyn by dating her, pleasing other girls by sleeping with them, and pleasing Marilyn further by not telling her about it. I'd been so arrogant, sometimes getting with people because I didn't want my unavailability to disappoint them, as if I was hot shit and they'd be devastated not to grab a slice of this. If physical intimacy with someone is a 10-step process like climbing a staircase, I found it natural to engage in steps 1 to 8 with almost anyone I met. And then he talks about Carrie finding out about the fact that he was cheating on her, and he says, "But Marilyn shattered that image. I saw myself for the first time the way everyone else did. I wasn't acting out of kindness. I was acting out of fear. I wasn't a sex addict. I wasn't incapable of monogamy. I was just a fucking dick." So I don't know about you, but all this sounds like he's coming clean, and he's pretty honest and intellectually aware of what he was doing and the true nature of his relations. It's interesting he talks about monogamy because right now he is in an open relationship, which honestly makes a lot more sense for someone like him. And I do kind of agree with him in that monogamy should be questioned more than it is. Not that it's wrong necessarily or unnatural, but just that it shouldn't just be the default that people, I'm monogamous because everyone else is. It should be a choice, it should be a choice that people have at least, instead of just being assumed that you're going to be monogamous. And clearly, later in life, he found that he was comfortable making the opposite choice. But at this point, early on, he was still trying to hold on to this fiction that he was monogamous, and it ended up hurting a lot of people. And I think this is part of what made it so easy to basically slander Alex Day. He already had this just undeniably bad thing that he had done, and so anything else that you pile on top of it just adds to it. And then he gets to talking about the allegations themselves. He says, "I was sat on Marilyn's bed with Netflix open. While I waited for her to make tea, I loaded up the next episode of the American version of The Office, and in the same moment, my email pinged. It was from Alan at DFTBA. The subject line was blank. The email contained only a link and the words, 'Is this true?' I clicked it and read, 'I was coerced into having sexual contact with Alex Day.'" Then he puts the contents of that allegation, starting the next chapter. It says, "I met him when I was 17 and a fan of his videos, and after talking online for less than a month, he invited me to stay over at his place. I was initially adamant that nothing would happen between us, and he initially agreed, but continually expressed a disregard for that further into our interactions. Once we were sleeping in the same room, as what I thought of as just friends, and he woke me up by kissing me and touching me sexually. I'm going to repeat that. I was asleep. I had fallen asleep, stating my desire to have no sexual contact with him, and he woke me up by violating these wishes. I know for a fact I'm not the only girl he has done this with." And he goes on to talk about it. He says, "It already had thousands of views and comments. I felt like I'd swallowed a football. My whole body was shaking. I replied to Alan, John, and Hank had been copied into the exchange as well, and said, 'No, it's not true. I felt sick. What should I do?' 'Look, if it's not true, it's not true,' John emailed back. I read the post again. The writer was anonymous, but it was obvious to me who was behind it. 'He cheated on his girlfriends with me multiple times,' they wrote. 'I wanted to please him because he talked a lot about how as soon as someone in his life did something he didn't like, he would cut them out completely.' I'd only had conversations like that with Crystal. Either this was Crystal or it was someone writing about us on her behalf. I don't know how long I sat there staring at the wall. I knew the kind of person I was and the bad things I had done, and sexually assaulting someone wasn't one of them. I didn't remember ever waking up Crystal by touching her sexually. That seems like the sort of thing I would remember. In any case, we made out for months before anything further happened between us. She was making it sound as though I just pounced on my platonic friend and sexually abused her, and she knew for a fact I'd done it to others? I didn't know what to do. I'd been taught, and I agree, that you don't blame a victim. Crystal was a victim of my manipulative behavior, and she wasn't to blame for what I did, but I wasn't to blame for what I didn't do. Hours later, I read another post. This one was anonymous too. I was also coerced into sex by Alex Day. He wasn't physically abusive with me, but beyond a doubt he was emotionally manipulative. He made me feel like I was special. He told me he was single. I didn't find out for months after that he wasn't, and had also been doing the same thing to other girls. He says, I knew based on the dates and anecdotes she provided that this was legit. It was a girl called Ellie. I started falling for her back when I was trying to end things with Marilyn the first time round. We went on a couple dates, then reality reminded me it was still there and I had to break things off. I never told her I was with Marilyn. She'd since found out after contacting Freya, who revealed the truth. Freya and Penny were now good friends with Crystal. Ellie continued, after a couple weeks, I demanded him to meet me to explain himself. He obliged. He was really repentant and explained that he had been selfish and thoughtless with his relationships his whole life and was only just coming to realize how destructive that was. He was changing. I asked if it was just me. He said yes. I always suspected he was lying about it being only me, a manipulation with positive intentions. He didn't want to cause any more harm than he already had. Alex goes on, that was true. We had met up for her to confront me, but I didn't know how to tell Marilyn that. A third anonymous post appeared that evening. Alex Day is a sexual predator who targets underage people. That was one hell of a headline. Fortunately, I knew the girl who had written this too, and it confirmed for me that it was all bullshit. I had spoken to her on Twitter and met her at an event for my card game when she'd bought a ticket. I emailed her to say I was looking forward to meeting her, and during the event she came along with her dad. She told me it was part of a collab channel with some friends. Each person made videos on a specific day of the week, and her video was from the day of the event, so she asked if we could film something together. Sure, I said. It's pretty noisy, though. We were surrounded by hundreds of people playing cards, cheering, and chatting with each other. Let's go into the back. She got her camera out, we chatted some rubbish for a few minutes, and as soon as we finished, we went back into the main room. Her dad met us at the door. He looked nervous and pulled her aside. Did anything happen? He asked her. No, she said, gasping. This became her anecdote of the day. She was telling everyone who would listen how funny it was that her dad thought something could have happened between the two of us. On my part, I found it strange that he could ever have thought that. Quite apart from anything else, I was at work and in public. A few months later, she started writing unfriendly things about me on Tumblr and Twitter. I can't remember if I saw them myself or if they were pointed out to me by someone else, but knowing my keen sense of detachment from online negativity, I can guess it was the latter. I didn't know why her opinion of me would have changed and contacted her, interested to know why. I don't remember what she said in response, but that was the last time we spoke. At least that's how I remember it. Then he goes on to show the allegation. I was targeted by him. He would organize events specifically to meet me and found my email address without me explicitly giving it to him and would email me often. At an event, we made a video in private, which was odd seeing as everyone else made one in the main room, and he tried to be inappropriate with me, but I managed to get out of the situation before it escalated. We spoke for a few months after, during which time I learned that he, not a Tumblr user at that point, was keeping up with my blog and Twitter account as he confronted me about a passing comment I made on one and about unfollowing him on the other. I learned from a mutual friend that he was still asking about me months after we had lost contact, and on the day that his girlfriend posted about being newly single, he attempted to make amends with me. I was left feeling threatened and exposed by his actions, and worried that it wasn't an isolated incident. I have since heard from mutual connections that it is not an isolated event. Alex Day is not safe and should be avoided. I'm scared that if he sees this, he'll trace it back to me and contact me, which is why I'm anonymous. I am not prepared to attach my identity to this. I organized events specifically to meet her? Did I invent the card game to meet her too? The video we made in that back room was still online when this post went live. I tracked it down and watched it. She uploaded it without any editing, meaning our entire interaction was on camera. And the only thing I could even tenuously describe as inappropriate was that at one point she said she didn't like her nose, and I said she had a nice nose. Either she was lying about what happened between us, or as before, there were vast differences in the way we both interpreted or remembered the event. My memory couldn't be that off. John and Hank had convinced a generation of internet-loving kids to imagine people complexly. So I figured they'd be my most considerate allies. I invited Hank into a Google Doc, an online document that can be edited by multiple people at once, and drafted a response for his opinion. After reading it, Hank shared his thoughts with me. It's good. You will get a lot of people asking for specifics. You'll get a lot of backlash. You should probably talk in the future posts in a somber tone about serious stuff, even if it's not this, and avoid being funny for a long while in videos or on Tumblr. And this is the most emotional Google Doc of all time. It was really heartbreaking to watch those words appear on the screen. This is a bad day, but I think you're handling it well. John and I, unfortunately, will need to stay out of it. Alex says, "No worries. Thanks for taking the time. I really needed it." Hank, "Okay, I've got to get going. I hope this all works out soon." Alex, "I'm really scared, Hank." Hank, "It's really scary." I posted my statement. The first anonymous person, the one I suspected was Crystal, responded, "I'm so angry. This is absolute bullshit, and people are going to believe you. You've just enabled every sexual abuser in a position of power to get away with this, as long as they say they didn't do it. I hope you realize how many people are going to be taken advantage of, abused, or raped because of this post." By the way, what he says in his post is people should always be encouraged to speak up in cases where they feel uncomfortable or mistreated, and the signal boosting of such cases are necessary to help other people that have been mistreated to speak up for themselves, to make people more aware of how their actions are interpreted, and feel more empowered to voice their concerns next time before things go too far. So yeah, even though he's defending himself a little in this post and saying that he didn't do anything to his recollection that anyone didn't want, and he's very sorry if anyone had a different experience of those events, Crystal is just not having it. She's very, very angry at him. And I find that interesting. Alex says she told the internet she wasn't okay with the fact he was cheating on his girlfriends, not mentioning she once high-fived me over it, and went into detail about how her experiences with me were pretty similar to those described on the Anonymous account, even writing, "They both sounded like I could have written them," which, if she did indeed write both of them, is pretty fucking bold of her. Crystal was the least of it. The floodgates were opened, and it seemed everyone I'd ever hurt was out for my blood, using Tumblr as the vessel of their vengeance. I was emotionally manipulated and lied to for a good portion of our relationship, wrote Laura, who had clearly learned the truth of my treatment of her since our breakup 2 years prior. Freya joined the fray, too. We texted constantly. He sent me the cliched, cute good morning and good night texts, and he told me he'd fallen for me. In the February, he came and stayed with me at uni. We didn't have sex. I said no, but my God, did he make me feel guilty for it. He continually told me, and had been for a few months, that it wasn't working with Marilyn and that he was going to end it, so he might as well. I found out about all of the other girls he was doing this to and tried to stop him. He said he couldn't. I was exhausted. By the May, all inappropriate contact between us stopped. Then he talks about that other allegation that I mentioned reading. He says, one weekend in 2011, Danny and I had gone to the Midlands to spend the weekend playing Sopio with some girls Danny knew. The house contained only one single bed and 2 doubles, and one of the other girls claimed the single earlier that night, so I was left to crash in bed with a shy girl with dyed red hair called Kira. Nothing happened between us. We left the next day, and I forgot about Kira until friends started bringing her up. This girl Kira was asking where you lived, someone told me. Apparently she hangs around Mile End Station because she thinks you live there, said another. At a house party, Danny left his phone charging and went to check it later to find Kira going through it, reading our texts and looking for my contact details. She turned up at one of my Lady Godiva signings, claiming that she had a dentist appointment in the area and had no idea I'd be there. Can I talk to him? She asked Danny. No, he's got to get to the next signing, he said. But the next signing's at 6, she objected, giving away her prior knowledge of my schedule. The last time I saw Kira was at the same Sopio event where it's claimed I preyed on a girl while her dad waited outside. When I left, Kira clung to me and said, I miss you. When am I going to see you again? And refused to let me go. Crystal had met her, and we'd had long, disbelieving chats about her unbalanced feelings towards me. She called her Crazy Kira. Crystal, the person who says, believe all victims, called her Crazy Kira. On Tumblr, Kira wrote that I traveled 3 hours to her house, which is in the middle of nowhere, along with a couple of others who were friends with her at the time, to stay over. She discloses that we shared a bed and adds, I'd never experienced anything like that before, especially when someone kind of ends up on top of you in the dark. This vague nod towards a nighttime something is as explicit as it gets. I suppose she didn't want to accuse me of anything specific because that would have been lying, but she embellishes with this. I hadn't been kissed or anything before, so this was my first exposure to this kind of thing. Crystal reposted Kira's story. Soon after that, the Swedish girl I cheated on Marilyn with put her story up too. So that's interesting. That puts a whole new context on this story that I talked about reading and being kind of disturbed at. It was left intentionally vague because it was meant to insinuate things that didn't actually happen. And I believe Alex, because unlike most people who are really vitriolic and angry and intolerant about this issue, he actually seems pretty intellectually honest, and like he doesn't want to discount other people's experiences, and like he just actually wants to have a conversation about things. So yeah, I'm much more likely to believe him than anyone else. But Crystal, the very person who called Kira Crazy Kira, she reposted Kira's story. Soon after that, the Swedish girl I cheated on Marilyn with put her story up too. When we met and actually hung out and I realized that this could potentially go somewhere, she wrote, I figured I might as well. I was in a very bad place and did whatever I could to bring pleasure to my own situation, even if it only lasted for a short while. I made a bad choice, and I do regret. Crystal reposted that as well. To help everyone follow along, another Tumblr user created a Masterpost, one post to rule them all, linking to every anecdote the user could find about me. All of my posts were there too, but with follow-up links to other people picking them apart, attempting to show how dishonest, manipulative, and cold-hearted I was being. Having all the anecdotes and accusations in a serial list gave equal weight to every story, so that while the one labeled first anonymous person talking about Alex is allegedly me touching someone in their sleep, the one labeled fourth person coming forward about Alex is from an old friend of mine who said this. I sent him an email telling him that I maybe kind of have feelings for him. He said something along the lines of, "Why didn't you tell me before VidCon? I would have made time for you, and we could have hooked up." Needless to say, my feelings weren't exactly returned. And I mean, it wasn't a big deal, really. So basically, all of these accusations, even the most mild-mannered ones, are kind of given that same weight because they're all put in this document. First, second, third allegations against Alex Day going all the way down. There were like 13 of them to my memory, which really, it presents this pattern of behavior that while there might be some truth to it, especially with stuff about cheating, that's definitely true. It's really dishonest and manipulative the way that it was presented. The more people wrote about their experiences with me, the more ridiculous the things they shared were becoming. In 2008, I'd spent all day at a YouTube gathering holding hands with a girl who now recounted, "As I was leaving the gathering by myself, Alex walked with me and tried to kiss me when I hugged him goodbye. I rejected the kiss, and to this Alex accepted and didn't try to make a move again. In fact, I have a clear memory of him saying, 'It's your choice, don't worry, you've made your decision.' I'd really like to express here that in no way did he try anything again physically or show a disregard for my decision." However, soon after this, Facebook messages started. Below, I have attached just a selection of the not very long Facebook conversations we had over the course of a few months. What followed were a few cringy teenage boy messages I'd sent her like, "You suck for being gorgeous," and "You're insanely hot, smile, XX." She'd edited out her messages back so it looked like I was bombarding her with flirt after flirt with no response. I don't feel affected emotionally by these incidents now, as it was an awfully long time ago and it was strictly flirting and not physical, she concludes, and went up on the list, the next person to come forward. So even though she's like, it was no big deal, she still decides to publish this, and the person who runs the Masterpost decided to add this to the list, which just, it's such a nothing testimony and a dishonestly framed testimony, like he says. But things like this are all given equal weight. And like I said, nobody in the Nerdfighter community was speaking up about this. Nobody was giving any credence to the idea that maybe there was some dishonest manipulation going on from the other side. Everyone was talking about, oh, Alex Day is a dishonest, manipulative, abusive liar. And that was just an assumption, which had some amount of truth to it, but it was a very small amount of truth. And then it just got overblown into this insane overreaction. And I was like the only person who didn't agree with this reaction. It was so ubiquitous. The response was just completely shutting him down. And it was like, it was me and a few other people who objected to it. And so, yeah, it's kind of vindicating me reading all this, because what I wanted this whole time was his side of the story. And I'm finally getting it, and it feels like a wound that's been 8 years in the mending for me. Like, I'm finally getting over this irritation that I've had with the Nerdfighter community, because I finally get to... This was actually the first video that I ever wanted to make. I've wanted to be a YouTuber since I was 13, actually. And this is the first video that I remember coming up with the concept of and really wanting to make it. And of course, I wasn't really able to make it back then because I wasn't a YouTuber and I didn't want to be a YouTuber at that point. I wanted to be later in my life. And so now I finally get to make it, and you know what? It's very cathartic. I fell asleep late in the night and woke up to my Canadian friend Carrie. Carrie is not the Carrie, it's spelled Kerri, different Carrie. Canadian friend Carrie expressing public horror that I'd approached her so recently. I liked him, she wrote, and I thought about meeting up with him, and what if I had? He might have hit on me. I might have let him. Thank goodness now I know what he's like. Abusive tweets were lighting up my pocket every few seconds. I emailed Hank again. I don't know what to do. Marilyn broke up with me and I just want this to stop. Please tell me what to say to make it stop. I'd forgot that Hank was friends with Penny. You have to admit to everything, he said. You have to tell people you thought it was your job as a man to push and their job as a woman to play hard to get. I couldn't believe someone who had known me for so long would think me capable of this kind of behavior. But then, he'd known them just as long. I'd introduced most of those girls to the community in the first place. He had no reason to doubt them. Even I didn't doubt them. I couldn't think of any reason they would lie about it. They must really feel like that. They really did remember it that way. If that's how I made them feel, then that's how I made them feel. My side of the story didn't matter. Thank the victims for speaking up, said Hank. Repent, openly. That's the only way things can move forward. I guess I'm not going to resist the urge to put Marilyn Manson into every video I make. I always find room for him somewhere. Hank, John, and I jumped on a Google Doc to collaborate on a second post. It had been a dream of mine to write something with John. A public response to allegations of sexual and emotional impropriety wasn't what I had in mind. When I referred to these events happening in the past, writing about that period of my life, John wrote, "Don't act like it has passed. You don't know if it has passed, for sure. Life is long. Just say what happened." Only no means no is not a model of consent, said Hank. It's a recipe for abuse. You must acknowledge the bravery of the victims, said John. I am deeply, deeply ashamed, suggested Hank.
Terribly, terribly ashamed of my actions.
Yeah.
2 terriblies?
It's supposed to show contrition.
Yeah, well, I just wouldn't use that word. I would never say the word terribly.
Now begins the long process of making amends, John added. I know you just want this to go away, Hank said when I objected to their suggestions, but that's not going to happen super fast. I ended up posting this. Until yesterday, I thought that I had only appropriate, though occasionally manipulative relationships with women. However, the model of consent that I followed, not that I specifically thought about it at the time, was that only no meant no. This is not what consent is. The result of that belief that only no means no is that I spent a long part of my life doing shitty things to good people and barely ever realizing or acknowledging that I was doing the shitty things. I'm grateful that victims have come forward to help me recognize how awful that was and to clarify it was an awful way to treat people in my life. I became an incredibly manipulative person and didn't really care about people's feelings. In my sexual experiences with people, nobody ever outright told me, no, stop, or pushed me away, or I'd immediately stop doing whatever we were doing. Everyone I'd done stuff with has been above the age of consent, and in all the cases of me having sex with people, everyone says they consented to it. But there were clearly times when I would try to initiate something because I thought the other person wanted it, and trusted my own read of the situation. They agreed to stay over, they said they wanted it earlier, etc., rather than paying attention to what the other person was doing and saying in that moment. That's where I massively fucked up. It's only in the last 24 hours that I'm realizing how much I created situations that put people under enormous pressure. I wasn't being responsible enough to be fully aware of it, and that's my fault entirely. I want to be clear that I'm not blaming this on my lack of awareness or knowledge of consent and boundaries. I'm blaming myself. I'm deeply, deeply ashamed of this.
Son, I'm terribly, terribly ashamed of my actions.
So, here we have a situation where instead of being good friends and wanting to hear Alex's side of the story at least before coming up with a response for it, John and Hank, the people who say don't forget to be awesome and imagine people complexly, completely failed on their obligations as friends, and they completely turned against him. Not completely, but they turned against him in the sense that they just immediately assumed that he was guilty of everything he'd been accused of. And yeah, they were trying to help him, but I think their help was very misguided, because it wasn't help to just tell him what to say. to tell him that he needed to validate everything that was being said about him wholeheartedly and not provide any kind of rebuttal. Real help and guidance would have been something of quite a different character. And looking at this, I can definitely see where John and Hank were coming from. I don't really, I'm not saying they were totally unwise, but I think they were very unwise is what I'm saying. I don't think this was the proper way to handle the situation. Basically manufacturing a fake response, because all it did is make Alex look more guilty of things that he didn't really do. And yeah, there's some small amount of truth in these allegations. Of course there is. But at the time, we didn't know. Everyone else thought they knew, but I didn't know what the truth was. And so I remember reading this post that Hank and John edited with Alex. And I remember thinking, man, if Alex himself is admitting to all this, then man, he must be guilty. I didn't totally turn against Alex at that time, but I was like, man, this is some deep stuff. And so it was actually very surprising to me reading this book. It was surprising to me how much I was vindicated. I didn't expect to be vindicated so much because I thought I was misled into believing this post because Alex posted this, so I assumed it was true. But it was all fake. It was all nonsense. It was all manufactured in order to placate people who just can't be pleased. And, you know, it was shown that after he posted this, it didn't make anyone happy. Nobody forgave him. In fact, they just got more angry at him because anything that he said, as long as he's labeled an abuser, anything that he says is only more evidence to them. They can find more ways to call him manipulative, say, oh, he's apologizing so that he can manipulate us into trusting him again, so that way he can go out and do it again and won't be suspected. It was all that kind of stuff. And with a culture like that that doesn't accept any kind of apology, no matter how validating it is to the position they're trying to apologize to, I mean, that's just disgusting. You can see why I left this community. It's just revolting. I have no doubt, wrote Hank, that Alex and Steve took advantage of people and knew what they were doing. Thank you for the victims for coming forward. To be honest, I'm completely disgusted, Penny tweeted. It's amazing, too, that now Alex Day claimed he does know that no means no. When I said I don't want to kiss you, he took that as a yes. He emotionally manipulated people the entire time I knew him, and now he's doing it to all of you. See? See what I'm talking about? When you lie about the situation in order to please people, it only makes the situation worse. And Hank and John didn't know that? Oh, it's so frustrating. It's sort of like going up to your bishop because you find out that you're gay or whatever, and you're like, man, bishop, please tell me what I can do to make amends to God. And he's like, you gotta admit that you're a pedophile, and you gotta like get down on your knees and whip yourself 5 times a day. It's that kind of, it's like, yeah, the bishop is trying to help, but he's not helping. He's just making it worse. Then I heard from Charlie. He sent me an email telling me he was shocked and dismayed by my new post admitting to all the horrible things I'd been accused of doing. He said he was facing a lot of online calls to speak out about the situation. People assumed he must have known something, and would be writing a public blog post distancing himself from me. In my reply, I asked him to meet with me or speak with me over the phone so we could discuss what happened. I needed to tell him how all this felt from my perspective, and didn't want to do it in a way that could be copied and pasted online. That would make me feel uncomfortable, he sent back. If you want to talk, we can do it over email. Charlie had an email assistant at the time. In fact, I'd introduced them. It was Crystal. So I said no. He never spoke to me again. And he writes Charlie, the blog post that Charlie wrote, in the time that I knew Alex, I never had any notion that the girls he was with were anything other than happily consenting to be with him. The idea that anything contrary to that was going on behind closed doors makes me incredibly unhappy And with that, I just don't feel able to call Alex a friend of mine anymore. Simply put, I don't know if I can trust him. I was baffled when, despite my attempts to clarify things, Charlie added, "The frustrating reality is that I just can't know for sure what's actually happened. As much as I wish I could know the truth, I have just the same information as everyone else, and so all I can do is make assumptions based on that." So Alex offers to explain his side of the story, and Charlie refuses, and then he says, "Oh, I wish I had more of the story. I only know just as much as anyone else. I've never been given any kind of opportunity to know any other perspective on the events, so I'm just totally clueless." Man, reading all this stuff just, ugh. Everyone else talks about how they're disturbed about these revelations about Alex Day, but reading this, I'm disturbed about all the revelations about everyone associated with Alex Day. People who I used to watch and be a fan of. And then he goes on to talk about his experience in the aftermath of this. He says, "I understood I was now an abuser. Tens of thousands of people had told me so. That was a crime, so it was only a matter of seconds until I was taken away for questioning, if not charged outright. With that in mind, I didn't want any additional evidence being used against me in court. I didn't want the police to ask why I had girls on my Facebook that I'd met online. I didn't want them asked why I had keepsakes from them in my flat. After about an hour of sitting and waiting, I stepped outside to buy some water, leaving my phone and the scrolling hate machine it carried at home. The woman at the checkout smiled at me. "How's your day going?" she asked. "Yeah, all right," I said in a daze. I didn't understand why she was being so nice to me. "Haven't you read what I've done?" 3 days passed and I started to suspect maybe the police weren't coming for me. I couldn't understand why. I wanted to go to the station myself and turn myself in. "Apparently I'm an abuser," I would say. "Please arrest me and give me a trial so we can determine what happened and I can move on with my life." At least I would be treated as innocent until proven guilty, with the rights to a fair trial and to face my accusers, not locked in the stocks in the town square having tomatoes thrown at me while I festered in the mess. I longed for a thorough, impartial process to delve into all of this. Instead, I just kept waiting, my name never clearing, or being conclusively mudded either. Every day I reflected on the hate people felt toward me. I was scared not just of what they'd said, but that maybe they were right. Most of these girls had been good friends of mine. I'd sought their opinions and shared my art with them. I trusted them. If they said I manipulated or abused them, I saw no reason other than my own subjective experience to doubt them. I knew them too well to believe they would make it up. With that on my mind, I started to doubt my own sanity. I began to believe I was the worst kind of predator, the kind who not only abused people, but didn't even realize he was doing it, and therefore didn't know how to stop. I must have been an awful person since it was so clear to everybody else. I figured I was devoid of critical emotional faculties. Probation officers and psychotherapists who were also nerdfighters analyzed my statements on their blogs, pointing out how they proved I was manipulative. They called me a psychopath. I took a test for autism and learned about what was called in psychology the dark triad, the combined traits of sociopathy, narcissism, and Machiavellianism. If I couldn't change, I would have to embrace it. I designed a dark triad tattoo and planned to get it on my chest, over my heart, so I wouldn't ever forget the truth. So that's the end of the stuff that I'm going to be reading from the book. I just thought that perspective needed to be heard, and I don't know if anyone on YouTube has published that perspective yet. And I just think, whatever you want to think about it, it deserves to at least be heard. You deserve to hear what he has to say, whether you like it or not. And the events he talks about after that stuff in the book are also very interesting. He talks about going to Plum Village and how the monks at Plum Village helped him understand more about himself and to forgive himself. And but then he returned back to YouTube and he returned back to England for a while, and he saw that the whole world had kind of advanced beyond him. You know, Zoella had her big book that came out. He was supposed to be the first YouTuber with a book deal. Now she was. John Green had written The Fault in Our Stars. YouTubers who he had known had broken out into the music industry in a way that he was never able to. And it was like the whole world had rejected him and then advanced beyond him. And then when he came back to YouTube, of course, everyone was mad at him. And it started this long process, this long, like, harassment campaign, I guess, against Alex Day. Everywhere he went, anything he tried to do, people would try to shut him down. People would say, hey, did you know that this guy is an abuser who's manipulating, blah, blah, blah. And that stopped him from getting lodgings in places. That's, you know, it's like, it's affected his life a tremendous deal. And he started feeling really bad about it again. And then he went to a Vipassana. Is that what it's called? I think it's called a Vipassana retreat, which is like a place where you just meditate all day, every day. And he went there, and that kind of also helped him discover himself and recontextualize and understand things. He went vegan, which I approve of. I'm vegan. Just lots of great, interesting stuff in this book about shame and about overcoming shame and overcoming the public perception of what other people think of you. I found it a very inspiring story, and by the end of it, I was just, I was thoroughly satisfied with the book. And by the way, the woman who wrote the thing about when she was 15 and he took her into a private room, she actually ended up reaching out to Alex later on saying, yeah, I'm sorry I was a messed up person back then. And, you know, maybe you still did a lot of wrong things and all that, but I'm sorry that you were treated the way you were. And, I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'm asking for it anyway. And I mean, reading that made me feel totally vindicated because, like, even she admits that it was nonsense from the beginning. So yeah, Living and Dying on the Internet, great book. I have read about 8 memoirs, I believe. I've read Bill Pete's autobiography. I've read The Long Hard Road Out of Hell by Marilyn Manson and Neil Strauss. I've read My Life by Oswald Mosley, my autobiography by Benito Mussolini, That Guy Faye the Corys by Ronnie Brown. I reluctantly read Memoirs of a Slave Girl because I had to read that for a class one time. I've read 7 Pillars of Wisdom by T.E. Lawrence. So yeah, I'm not the biggest memoir reader, but I've read a few of them, and with Bill Pete's autobiography in second place, that one's very easy to read, by the way. It's a picture book. You can read it in like 3 to 5 hours. I highly recommend it. This is the best memoir I've ever read. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I give it 5 stars. And I would recommend checking it out. I also recommend checking out Alex Day's Patreon. I'll link it in the description, or in the doobly-doo, as they used to say in Nerdfighter area. And check it out, because, you know, if you liked Alex's videos in the past, his videos are just the same and even better than they were before.